Women in Leadership. My name is Elisabeth Ballerman. I am the president of the Health Sciences Association, the Union of Health Professionals, and I am supposed to be facilitating this thing. As we've done, all of you have been to story circles now. I think they've all been just a little bit different. We have 5 women here who have been in leadership positions, whom you will get to know in a moment. I have been privileged to know all of them and work with all of them at some point. I'm going to tell you that I'm the baby of this group.
Not age-wise.
Well, I think every one of them was in their leadership position before I was elected to mine. So, and I got to know some of them very, very well. They are each going to tell you about the struggles, their experiences as women in leadership position. I just said to them as we gathered, this is probably one of the few times that you've got a group of union leaders together who are all female, because all of us probably have the experience of being in a room of union leaders and being the only woman at some point in time. So we have with us former president of the Alberta Federation of Labour, Audrey Cormack. Our former and still only female mayor of Edmonton, Jan Reimer. Our current leader of the United Nurses of Alberta, Heather Smith. Susan Keeley was with CUPE Alberta and is now going to tell us about, she's going to wrap up this program, she's going to tell you about Sisters from Hell. And Clancy Teslenko, who is going to lead off this session, will tell you about her involvement with the laundry workers' strike of 1995. That's the year I was elected, and let me tell you, that was one of the very first picket lines that I was on as leader, and wow, what a ride. So without further ado, each person will give 3 to 5 minutes of their story, and then we're going to turn it over to you to share your stories, perhaps ask some questions. They want to reserve the right to rebut each other a little bit. I'll see how that goes to see how much latitude we give them. And then Andrea, our young person just entering the workforce, who's just graduated from University of Alberta, is going to wrap us up to share with us what her reflections and what she's taking away from the session, and perhaps what she's hoping for as she enters the workforce. Without further ado, Clancy.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It was my pleasure to have you on the first picket line. Has anybody ever heard of the laundry workers' strike? How many of you were actually on the picket line? Quite a few of you. Okay. So you know what it was about. I guess looking at, we want to learn from our past and move forward. One of the first things I have to do is admit my guilt as to how this situation came about. Earlier in '93, there was collective bargaining happening, and our collective bargaining is done provincially. And at that particular time, the Regional Health Authority said to the provincial negotiator, we have a special deal we have to talk to the people at the General about. So at that time, I was president of the local, so that would have been '93. What they approached us about was the laundry. And at that time, the laundry was being run as a business in cooperation with the hospital. And it was, according to the figures they showed us, running in the red. It was running at a deficit. And what we were told at that time is there had to be concessions. There had to be rollbacks for these people to keep their jobs. So as most of us, young, inexperienced, said, that sounds reasonable. We want to keep our jobs. So I negotiated a 28% rollback in these people's wages to keep their jobs. So then we move ahead 2 years. I'm no longer president. I wonder why. I think I just answered my own question. And I didn't know at the time, but there was a meeting in the laundry, and the laundry workers were all told that they were going to be laid off, that they were given their notice and they were going to be out the door. I didn't know about the meeting that night that took place in the community center beside. So a lot of what I'm going to tell you is from the workers themselves of what happened that particular night. And what I was told was I felt like I was kicked in the stomach. We took a rollback. We took over $2 an hour rollback to keep our jobs. And this is how they're treating us. Where is our justice? And there was none. There was none. So, sorry. Old age and water pills make you thirsty. So, the laundry workers' strike, I guess, came from the gut. It was an illegal strike. It was done. If you look at pictures in the book out there, you will see the majority of workers are women. The majority of workers were immigrant women, and it was powerful. It was women who worked all their lives quietly. They went into the laundry. They did the dirty, stinky jobs. They hardly said boo. They were so excited if they got anything. And all of a sudden, here they are. Some of them had been there 30, 35 years, 20 years, 15 years. Some of them were just starting, you know, and it was like, we're supposed to feel safe and secure in a hospital. So the picket line started. I missed the meeting, but I heard it was actually the women who stood up and said, we're not going to do information pickets. We're going on strike. We don't care. We've got nothing to lose. And that's where it went from there. So at the time I was a unit clerk, and when I found out about that they were out, I walked off the job and came down and started walking the line with them. And every day we would meet, and Susan and I were talking the other day. I had a storybook, and it was called Strike. And every morning about 5 o'clock in the morning, we'd huddle around the heater and we would read this book to the striking workers. And it was just a basic book about why these women were on strike in the fisheries in Newfoundland. And you could see each day, you know, I'm an action person, I'm sorry. The first day of the strike, the women are like this. They're scared. They don't know what they're doing. They've never been on a picket line. They've never challenged authority. And day by day, the backs came up a little more. The signs got a little bit higher. The voices got louder. And the chants that they were coming out with, that was amazing. This empowered those women so much. It was like, for me, I get goosebumps talking about it, because it was to be on that line and watch these women grow and watch them find their voices and watch them never back down again. It was amazing. Like, we would have, after the strike was over, the aftermath, we had a situation where, you know, strikes cost money, and our local was devastated. Well, we had to put forward a motion for a dues increase. And I want to tell you, the people that stood up in favor of the dues increase, and I mean no offense, but you're going to be offended, it wasn't the white males in the maintenance department. It wasn't the white females in the secretarial jobs. It was the immigrant women workers who walked the line for the laundry workers. Those were the women who stood up and spoke in favor and recognized their need to have a union and their need to have a strong union. And just to hear them, like, your heart just goes boom, boom, boom. Anyway, that's my story.
Is there a second?
Did I keep it within my 5?
Pretty close.
Thank you, Clancy. I remember that strike well. My story is just a little bit different. which I guess is why we're all here. We just have a little bit of a different story. Try to be brief. I came out of the Energy and Chemical Workers Union, which was majority male. I worked in the gas company in Leduc, Central Gas, and we were one of the few that the office staff was organized. When I started there in 1980, we had a company union, and we organized with ECW, and then later became Communications, Energy and Paper, CEP, thank you, which Dave Coles is the president. So that's my history. So it's a little bit different, came out of a male-oriented, and it's amazing when you're away from this how nervous you become, but so I apologize, bear with me. So I was elected to the Federation in the late 80s, and it was a very interesting time because let's look at the facts. I was run as a candidate because I was a female out of the male-dominated industrial union sector. It was time for women to be elected into these positions, and good for the labor movement for recognizing that. But in 1980, at one of my first conferences, there were a lot of women on that podium. Jan Reimer was there. I think, Heather, you were elected 88. So you were there. Pat Walkness was president of AUPE. There was a lot of women role models for us. It was also the year that 13 of our sisters were killed in Montreal. And that was a stark reminder to us, feeling maybe just a little bit smug about where we were going as women, that we had a battle ahead of us. And it was a serious battle. And we took it seriously, and it was quite an honor and a privilege to be a leader in the labor movement at that time. And the role between leadership and the role of leadership at the Central Labor Movement is just a little bit different. So leadership, you're supposed to be a leader, and you're supposed to inspire your membership and the members of the unions and do all of that. And you do that. But I really do believe that a big part of our work was to make sure we were front and center with our unions. I don't think between 1989 and 2001 there was a picket line that I was not on. We were on, because that was our role, to make sure we were there with the struggles of our unions, to make sure that we were putting their issues forward. The other part of our job was to meet with the governments of the day. Again, a little bit privileged for me. We had Jan as mayor, and we were able to meet with her, and I had a very good working relationship. But I also stayed long enough to have, Bill Smith, and that wasn't such a good relationship, trust me. But, and we meet with the government. That was our job as well. We had to go and work on the issues that meant something to the members, to the unions. And so that was a big part of it. But there's no question, it was an honor, but it was tough. It wasn't easy for women. We were still in the situation where we had our kids and our families, and we still got asked, I many times got asked by brothers when I was at a meeting, where were my kids? Well, one time I just said, I left them at home. I mean, crap, they're in kindergarten, why not? I don't think my brothers ever got asked that question. You know, it's ridiculous. And when it's just on and on. You could go on with stories like that. But the big challenge is to rise above it. It's just to know what's right, know what your goal is and your value is, and just know that you're going to accomplish and do that. We had the best part, I think, not because I like people to be out on strike, but to be on those picket lines with our brothers and sisters, because they're putting their jobs and their life on the line. And so we're out there supporting them. And we had some good times, we had some fun times, and I was reminded earlier about one particular picket line, I think Slave Lake? Yeah. We were out on the picket line, and Ziegler's, that's right, and it was some discussion about whether or not we should stay out after the police had told us we should disband, I guess. And some people decided we should go. But our staff decided we shouldn't go. And so we had to make a pretty quick decision about whose side we were on, and we stayed quite a while on that picket line. We did not leave. So we weren't always good behaved, and we had some fun, but it was an interesting time, and it was an honor. And I think that we had a lot of battles over healthcare, education, and right to work, and on and on and on. And we were there for all of them, and I hope that some of that legacy is still here, that people understand that it's a piece of the puzzle. I mean, I like to do puzzles, and sometimes one falls, and you're forever searching. When you find that, you figure, oh, you got this little piece. I think that's for all of us. It's a piece of the puzzle, and together we make the whole that makes us successful in the end.
Thanks, Audrey. And Heather.
Actually, I'm going to start with a question, because we've had some comments about strikes. So I'm going to ask a question. When was the last time that nurses represented by United Nurses of Alberta, the hospital nurses, went on strike? Oh, good, you know. Because when I ask sometimes people think it's been more recent than that. We've actually had a strike vote since then, but we didn't have to exercise it. Unlike Audrey and Clancy, my workplace was primarily women. When I entered nursing, it was almost 99% women, but we didn't always have a say. I was a very new grad here in the province when I went on strike for the first time. That was in 1977, and in fact, over the course of 11 years, I was on strike 4 different times. Many people remember the 1988 strike because it was illegal from start to finish. We were told we couldn't even take a strike vote, and in fact, I've thanked the Labour Board rep who did that, because in fact that put us over, as it were, and telling us that as women we didn't have the right to even vote on whether or not we wanted to go on strike resulted in a record turnout as well as a record for strike vote. Taking the vote was illegal, going out was illegal, but in fact, that was not my first illegal strike. In 1977, our first strike, we were all very naive. You know, nursing, if you look at nursing, we were very low paid. We compared ourselves to all sorts of people around us and said, this isn't right. The value of nursing work certainly wasn't being recognized. I think it was being equated quite often to charitable work, and I remember Margaret Etche saying, we're no longer the Sisters of Charity. But we went out for the first time, and many people think it was a huge strike. It was only actually 6 hospitals across the province that went out, mine being one of them. And we were out, and it was bold and daring. We were ordered back, and we obediently went back. We were forced to arbitration, and the arbitrator said things like, on the most important issue of the strike for me, which was trying to achieve something called professional responsibility, the ability for nurses to advocate for patients in their work sites. The arbitrator ruled that, said that sailors don't tell the captain how to run the ship, which I think encapsulates the whole attitude towards nurses at that time and women in the workplace and what our appropriate role should be. So in 1980, we went out again. 1980 was about getting our professional responsibility. It was about getting wages. It was about all kinds of things. And, the employers thought they had a win-win solution. We go out, they order us back, we go to arbitration, get nothing. Well, in fact, they did order us back, and we didn't go. That was our first illegal strike, was in 1980, and I think that was actually the moment in my life where things really changed, when we survived defying the back to work legislation. It made other things so much easier. 82, strike again, our longest strike actually. We did agree to go to, well, we didn't agree to go to arbitration. We had what I call the witch hunt imposed upon us after that round. and then the right to strike was taken away. We vowed as an organization that we would set our own rules, that we would determine our destiny. And I think this is not isolated to Alberta or United Nurses of Alberta, but I think it was a rising movement across the country for nurses. Nurses had only come into unionizing in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. And before that, our professional organization bargained on our behalf. So the people who are our managers did our bargaining, which explains a lot of the results we got. We did get professional responsibility after 1980, and it is, I say to you today, the most powerful tool that we as nurses, we as women have in our workplace, because if we have a concern about patient care and it is not resolved, we can go to the Board of Trustees, which is now Alberta Health Services. The threat of going to the Board of Trustees will often result in action being taken, but we went from having no right to any say to actually being able to get direct access to the Board of Trustees, which in healthcare and certainly in nursing was unheard of. In terms of women and nurses and the changes, I look back over my time as a union leader here in Alberta, and we've made a lot of changes, unique, I think, in terms of union. 20 years ago, we started actively computerizing, putting computers in the homes of our worksite leaders. We have a network across the province where we can communicate. Nurses across the country, not only unionized, about 90% actually are unionized, but have taken steps to go beyond their work sites, to go beyond their province in terms of joining the Alberta Federation of Labour here, but also joining the Canadian Labour Congress. And I don't think it's just a matter of my union and nurses, but I also think that the inclusion in Alberta, particularly of health sciences, a lot of women, and a lot of women engaged in public service and engaged at the CLC level, is actually changing some of the face of labor, not just provincially but nationally as well, in terms of how things are done and what things are said. So I think it's been a very challenging time to be in a labor movement, in labor in Alberta. We've had for nursing what I call the roller coaster. We have too many, we have too few, we have too many, we have too few. We're going to make sure we have too few because we're going to lay you all off. Or, we certainly had very specific examples of gender insult during Ralph Klein's time, for instance, when the 4 leaders of unions were women, the AFL, AUPE, Alberta Teachers, and UNA, and we were called the babes of the apocalypse when we fought back against very destructive social changes around us. But I think that we have come a long way, but collectively, and I don't think I'd ever think of it in a gender way. Collectively, we obviously have a long way to go.
Well, it's interesting just to hear some of these different stories. You may have been the babes of the apocalypse. I was that pinko eco-feminist bitch. Right. It's all, but it was at that time was a very interesting time, and women were often put down because of, what they said, what they were doing, and simply because of their gender. And things have gotten better, but I think I'll wrap up with how things can still get better. I guess my story is quite a bit different. But the linkage with the trade union movement is really that I grew up with it. So I don't even remember how old I was on my first picket line. I may have been carried. I learned a lot, I guess, from my father's association with the labor movement. The importance of having that backbone, that importance of social justice, of standing up for the right thing, of not backing down. and trying to keep that alive in my own personal life and in the work that I'm doing now. I think, though, it's, there's so many different stories about how women are treated in politics. Audrey, I enjoyed your comment about, well, where are your kids right now? Because I remember when the first time I ran for mayor, they did these big stories, the focus on the candidate. So I was the last one. So all the other male candidates, it was, what are his plans for the city? What does he see for the future? What has he contributed in the past? And for mine, it was, well, can she really be a mother and a mayor? So, how do you answer something like that? And that was by a fairly progressive newspaper writer at the time. But there is that different standard. And even being called, I guess, by some of your colleagues, even on city council, about what women are doing. And so it really resonated with me. I don't know if you saw a little while ago about the woman who was on council in southern Alberta who was breastfeeding her baby. And so that brought back memories because, that time I was turning city council chambers into a nursery, and that wasn't a good thing either. So the whole way of trying to accommodate women in childbearing years, in working, and how that's regarded, I think still has to change a lot, but I do think we've made some progress. Lots of stories. A lot of them are quite funny, because when I was mayor and my name was Jan, and people who were coming, visiting delegations from Europe and from Asia in particular, well, Jan's a guy, right? So they walk into the office, they shake hands with my executive assistant, and they give him a tie. So, he eventually set them right and said, this is the mayor. And so some had great comebacks like, oh, you're too young to be a mayor. But I have to say, I probably had the best tie collection of any man in the city. And I remember when I was first elected to city council, and Cease Purvis, who was the mayor then, and he calls me in and he says, well, dear, it's okay if you cry, we could understand, But I think he was the one who was crying first when he got caught on his land deals. And then he was very puzzled because I hadn't changed my name, and, why didn't you change your name, kind of thing. So some of those things haven't really changed over time. I had a great mentor on council, Betty Hughes, as well, and she gave me a lot of guidance and would take the baby barf off my shoulders when I was first learning the ropes. And she used to say, she had these great lines like how, there is this double standard. And, well, men are so detailed, we all know that, but what are women? They're picky, right? Or, oh, look at him, he's kind of out of sorts. He must have had a really bad day. And what is it for her? It's that time of month, right? And, oh, he's out running errands, he's not in his office, and, well, she's gone shopping again. So, there is that double standard, and I think it still permeates with us. Audrey talked about, you really do have to rise above, because some of that stuff can, after a while, it kind of gets you down, and a lot of it isn't very nice. I mean, I've talked about some of the funny stuff, but, some of it can be quite cruel and hurtful. And I think one of the things I learned, one person once told me, oh, Jan, you've just got hurt feelings, and you can't have that luxury, really. You've got to think about always addressing the issue, and that was a good learning for me. Yes. The other, I think, is that because things can get really rough, you have to sometimes build up a callus, but doesn't mean you're not tender underneath. But you never want to become like a Margaret Thatcher, who's kind of what I'd call a man in skirts. So you've got to kind of guard against those kinds of pieces. And I think what women do sometimes too is they don't celebrate their accomplishments. We network, right? We get some kind of victory, we pull together, we get something done, and we do it because we network, and then we'll network again. And maybe we don't stop enough to point out what those accomplishments have been, and we don't point them out enough for our sisters. And I think that's one thing too, to celebrate those successes is tremendously important. That being said, we do have room to grow. Right now I work with the Alberta Council of Women's Shelters. They we have shelters all across the province. They're traditionally low paid, and our sisters who work on reserve are even the worst. I mean, they've never had funding increases for the last 5 years. Sometimes they're so poor and the shelter's so underfunded they bring food from home. And the federal government has not done a lot to change that, and they're also up against the patriarchy of the reserves as well in terms of their ability to have a voice. So there's a lot that has to still be done on that. We also, just this spring, did the first ever survey of men's attitudes towards violence against women. And some of you may have caught that. It's the first time it's ever been done in Canada, and we did it here. And looked at, well, what are men's attitudes towards violence? Because we really want to work with men to end violence against women, not fight against them, right? Because men can be powerful advocates. So we thought if we could learn more about what men's attitudes are, then we have a basis for shifting opinion. And we started with, we've been working with the White Ribbon Campaign, and they looked around the world to say, well, what are people doing right now around gender equity, and how are we measuring it? And they came up with what they call this gender equity score. And some of those questions I thought were pertinent for the discussion here today. That's what I'm going to leave you with to think about a bit. Because one of the questions was, on a whole, men make better politicians, better political leaders than women. And 21% of Alberta men agreed with that. That's 1 in 5, right? Men agree with that. So that does show that in spite of the fact that men think discrimination against women is no longer a problem in the workplace in Alberta, 43% of men think that. So right away you can see kind of the disconnect, and that just 16% of men still think a woman has to have children in order to be successful. So while we've got a lot of men that you've got the right ideas, still in Alberta, our gender equity needs some work. I'm trusting that our brothers sitting here are going to work on that, to speak out when they hear belittling comments. They're no longer idle bystanders, and while women are passionate about seeking the rights of their colleagues on the workplace, we all are passionate about seeking the rights of women, all across our province and indeed around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And Sister Susan is going to tell us about a whole other concept of sisterhood.
Thank you. As you've heard, as unionists and especially as feminists within the trade union movement, we've had to deal with a lot of conflict throughout our work careers and our union careers. It's always about conflict. It's always about negotiations and grievances and things that bring us in conflict with each other. And one of the things that I've learned as I've grown older is that we really do need some balance in our life. So on April 28th, 1989, we brought some balance to a certain extent. That was in the middle of the Alberta Federation of Labour Convention. One day, the first day at convention, there were 2 strikes happening in Edmonton at the time. And so we took buses out there, and half went to Ziedler's picket line. The other half went to Van Damme galvanizing picket line. And we thought, oh, great, we did some really good stuff showing solidarity to our brothers, mostly brothers in those units, and came back to our convention and thought everything was wonderful, until one of the picketers from Van Damme Galvanizing came and said, we really want to thank you for coming out, but after you left, the scabs came up to us and told us that we realize how strong and brave you are with all your friends, but wait till shift change tomorrow morning at 5, and we'll see who's got the strength then. So at that point, it was decided we had no choice. We had to be on the picket line at 5 o'clock in the morning. And for those that know me, 5 o'clock in the morning only gets seen if I've stayed up all night. Well, that is what ended up happening, because while a number of us said, well, we'll go to bed early so that we can get up. Well, we couldn't quite do that, because first there was the Workers' Health Center had an auction that we felt, well, we've got to support that. So we went to that dutifully. And then afterwards we were reminded, oh shoot, this is Labour Council night. So we had to go to the Labour Council function. And after the Labour Council function, the steelworkers were having a hospitality room. So before we knew it, it was like 3 in the morning. We're going, we'll never get up if we go to bed now. So consequently, a number of us showed up on the picket line a little worse for wear. And while we were walking that line, 2 brothers came towards 2 of us sisters saying, well, doesn't it look like the sisters from hell? And it was quite appropriate. And we thought, we like that. So we went back to the Fed convention, and there was this marvelous woman named Melva Forsberg who does Buttons Unlimited. And we asked her if she would make up 4 buttons for the 4 people that were involved in that conversation, saying sisters from hell. And we thought, well, yeah, it's kind of a cute joke, and that was the end of it. Well, it wasn't the end of it. Before about half hour was up, Melva was being inundated with people that wanted buttons. So out of that grew an idea that, well, if we're going to make buttons, we should do something with that. So we'll use it as a fundraiser, this time for the Workers' Health Center again, because we were quite enamored with that organization at that point. And so we agreed that Melva would charge us $2 for the button and $3 for us to use for fundraising. After we gave the first donation, it was $300 we raised during that convention alone. We decided that if this is going to happen again, that we would have to make some ideas of where else we would donate. So we ended up making donations as the organization grew to different facilities throughout the province, and some went to some women's shelters and some went to some other organizations, and we continued to grow. And everywhere we went, people wanted to join. So things happened. As the organization grew, we became more known for various little differences between us and the labor movement. And instead of being sworn in as a member, you were sworn at. And so we had a little swearing at ceremony saying that you pledged to honor the rules and regulations of the Sisters from Hell, even though there weren't any. We ended up having an official greeting, which many of the people here might remember, which denotes the lowering of the toilet seats for those brothers. We actually demoted one sister from hell to sister from heck on the advice of his partner, who said he never does that. So we created a lot of fun in these organizations, but we also did a lot of really good fundraising. One of the fundraisers ended up being a cookbook, and it was named for Sister Charity, who was Brother Bill Flukes, who had run as an MLA candidate, a New Democrat MLA, who had to challenge the election results because there were more irregularities than the numbers of votes that he lost by. So we fundraised, and we had the cookbook I think it just says cookbook for Sister Charity. Yeah, if you could. The other thing we did is we sold T-shirts and sweatshirts. And so there's our logo that was designed by Sister Melva. We had an official drink, which was the flaming sambuca. I mean, if we're from hell, we have to have flames. Well, and I have to tell you about the one. We decided after extensive research that only one drink per significant event, because after the research we realized you didn't always remember the significant event. So we did start limiting ourselves on that, though not everyone agreed to do that. But so we did those things, but part of what we did was really to talk about the things of being active, that we need to encourage people to be active and provide solidarity to our brothers and sisters in need, but we've got to do it in a fun way. Because the more fun you have, the more like you're going to continue doing things. And so for a number of years, we continued to grow and we continued to encourage people. We ended up having 3 official languages. The Sœurs de l'Enfer is en français, and Hermana de Inferno, I think, is the Spanish, and I should know it better than that. But we had newsletters. This is before the days when we had all these electronic gadgets that we could really send things out easily. But we did a number of things. We even had some campouts and built solidarity that way, and encouraged people always, always, always to go to the nearest picket line. And I think that that's something that we have to continue to encourage. And we ended up with over 30,000 members in about 7 different countries. Unfortunately, we're not very active anymore because, quite honestly, it became too much like work. I mean, we really did need to have staff and, become a true organization to keep it going, because there was the original 4 just really couldn't keep it up. And it really ended up being Sister Cindy McCallum from the postal workers who did most of the work. She was our chief battle axe. And I forgot to say at the beginning that I wanted to bring regrets from Sister, and she was going to originally come here to do this session, but unfortunately there was a serious illness in her family and she wasn't able to come. And she did say to say hi to all her old friends because she's living in BC now. So with that, I'll just say that whatever we have to do, no matter how serious it is, we can't take ourselves too seriously, and we have to have some balance in our lives and have some fun and laugh once in a while.
Absolutely. Thank you very much to our 5 panelists. And I have the microphone, so I get to abuse this, and my board know that I do this all the time. 1995, the laundry workers' strike was really formative for me as well. I was elected to my position in 1995. I was green as grass, didn't know anything. I thought I knew it all, right, as we all do when we first start. First picket line. Because of that picket line, a group of my members who were support workers in Lethbridge were facing within weeks exactly the same scenario. They were going to be contracted out. Beginning of December, they were told by the middle of January, your jobs are gone, we're contracting them out. They were all middle-aged women providing the most intimate personal care to their clients. They loved those clients, and they were told they were going to be out of a job. Because of the strength that these women, the immigrant women, showed, and the workers and the support that they got, those workers that I represented got the gumption to say, you know what, we have nothing to lose. And they went on a one-day strike. We managed to save their jobs, although as they left, they were contracted out by attrition, but at least for those workers, as they wanted to stay there. So that was really great. The other thing about the 1995 laundry workers' strike is the only time that I've ever been threatened with physical injury by one of my own members for walking with your picket line after they had voted not to walk out in support. So it's one of those interesting things. Now it's your turn. We would love to have you share some of your stories, some of your reminiscences, perhaps ask questions. Hands up, where would you like to be? And
I'll do the running.
thank you.
I'm just wondering, you mentioned at the beginning that getting together like this today was unusual, or it sounded like you were suggesting that. So I just wondered, what kind of infrastructure is there in the labor movement to allow women to get together? Like, do you have your own committee or something like that? Thanks.
Sister Susan and I met, and probably Audrey and hundreds of other women. The only time we got to meet was at picket lines or at Labor Council meetings or at fundraisers. There was never social events. So we decided we were going to start having a women's luncheon. And we've been doing that for about 4 years now. And so the second Thursday of every month, we meet at Swiss Chalet on Memorial Drive in Calgary, and it is an open invitation to any woman who wants to attend. And there is only one rule: you can't talk shop.
Well,
sort of.
the other rule is we don't take minutes and we don't have an executive. We're just there for the chance to socially network with each other and get to know each other as people and as sisters, and not to worry about work at that point. So we've got about an hour and a half, 2 hours where we just sit and relax and enjoy each other's company. Oh, and I should say we're called the Purple Hat Lunch Club. We didn't want to be Red Hat because they have organizational structure.
So we got hats and all. Within the Alberta Federation of Labour and many of the labour unions, there are women's committees which deal with women's issues. But I think the question is perhaps quite telling about how do we give women leaders or women an opportunity to talk about the issues of women. And probably as you asked that, there's precious little. So, next. Come on, there's such wealth in this room.
Hi, Betsy Jameson. This is an academic feminist version of the Sisters from Hell. And it's from the University of Colorado Springs in the probably early 80s. A good friend of mine named Marcia Westcott, who was a sociologist, became an associate dean. And one day she did something that ticked off one of her male colleagues who called her a bitch. And she smiled sweetly and said, "Yes, Bill, but I'm a tenured bitch." At that point, the tenured bitches were founded, and every time a young woman or a woman colleague got tenure, she got a T-shirt that said "tenured bitch." But it was also an organizing tactic, because then the rule was you protect your younger, untenured colleagues, and whenever there was a tense vote coming up, the call was "tenured bitches up front." And so this really goes back to the comment in the last session about what do the old folks do. Those of us who have job security or are retired, it's time for us to be the tenured bitches up front.
The job I'm listening to some of the sisters speaking, the job I have now, I'm actually a business agent for the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco, and Grain Millers Union. And as Heather was talking, I was sitting there thinking about the questions that I was asked, and I never really thought about it before, during my interview, were all about childcare. How are you going to be able to provide childcare if you're working these hours? Who's going to look after your daughter? Do you have a support system in place? And those were, interestingly enough, the majority of questions that were asked. I got the job anyway, but it makes you think. How many of you went through that? Yeah.
The kind thought would be that they were trying to figure out how to support you in that job and make sure you had those. That's right.
I was just better off finding the male candidate.
Clancy, you're talking about, those kinds of questions in the labor movement. Well, I recall when I first started working for the Alberta Federation of Labour, and at that particular time, there was a CLC pension plan that many of the officers belonged to, and there was a long discussion about whether or not the staff, and in particular, the women, clerical staff, should have a pension plan. And the president of the day said, "Oh, you girls don't need that. You have husbands to support you. It would just be pin money anyways." Well, unfortunately, the staff at the Federation never did get pension plans, and I think that's a crime. But I have to kind of fill in a little bit on Audrey's story, which was quite interesting. I was on staff at the Federation at that time, and we'd gone up to Slave Lake because the Zealers had been on strike, I think, for about 3 years at that time. And things were really, really tense. And one of the reasons we'd gone there was to support the workers on the picket line. And we were having an executive council meeting, and when the lunch hour came, we took off and went to the picket line. Well, some of our union brothers, including the president at the time, thought, well, it's 1 o'clock, we better go back and, proceed with our meeting. And the staff kind of looked at Audrey, because she was the secretary-treasurer. We came up here to support these workers, and the logging trucks were going to come in. We should stay on the picket line. That's what we came here for. So Audrey took command of the situation and defied the male counterparts on the executive, and we stayed on the picket line. So that's my story.
Can you ask for her reply? No. Okay.
Okay, I don't see any other hands. This is your opportunity. If not, yeah, share stories.
Susan has a
Oh,
There must be some good stories out there.
Yeah, I forgot to mention about the Sisters from Hell is that we were the Sisters from Hell, definitely, but we were an equal opportunity organization, and so the brothers were allowed to come in and join with us, but they had to become a sister, which meant that they had to pick a cisternal name. And one of my favorite cisternal names, I always remember this one, is Sister Frida Farkle of the famous Wine Farkle family. And I think Dave Verlin was Sister Murgatroyd. So, yeah, Bob White became a Sister from Hell and immediately went back to negotiations with Chrysler and said, "Don't piss me off, I'm a Sister from Hell." So the brothers played a very important role within the organization. We weren't exclusive by any means. And we actually even had an affirmative action program, but that wasn't based on gender, that was based on your sense of humor. And you were allowed in if you had a sense of humor. If you only had a limited sense of humor, we allowed you in the affirmative action program.
Okay, so I think we've heard a lot about let's take the work serious, but not so much ourselves. We have heard a lot about how there are still issues with regards to gender equity. We've made a lot of progress, but I think, and then the other part is really how do we mentor our younger sisters and support and not eat our young, as it were. So I think those are all really good learnings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to a young sister, Andrea.
Let's stand there.
Anywhere you like.
Okay. All right, so you have to bear with me. My notes are really disorganized and I can hardly read them here. So I think what I've taken the most away from today is a message of hope and a message of strength. When I was first asked to do this panel by Karen, I thought to myself of a book that I had read for a course called The Higher the Fewer. And what it was about was the higher you get in any organization, you have less women. Especially in what Heather was talking about, her union was primarily women, but you still have men in the highest leadership positions. So I think that being with these women has been a real honor, and I'm really glad that I got to be here with you guys. One of the big things that struck me today was Clancy's story, especially because in the morning session about the dandelions, there was a lot of questions and talking about people being afraid to strike. Because especially now, I mean, people live on credit, you strike, you can't pay your bills, you can't pay your mortgage. And just the strength in the women that really had nothing left to lose in the laundry workers' strike was amazing. And just hearing especially about the vote that they had to raise their union dues, it was probably the people that couldn't afford to raise their union dues that were the ones that wanted to do it. What was my other point here? Oh yeah. Also, Jenny sort of touched on this yesterday when she was talking about the book in the context of race, but there's also within the context of the labor movement, uniquely to women, is you're dealing with the struggles as a worker, but you're also dealing with the struggles as a woman. And it's really hard to sort of reconcile what is going to be important. Are you going to be a worker or are you going to be a woman, and how do you be both? And finally, I'd just like to end with, right before we started, me and Audrey had a little conversation, and she asked me what I did for work. And I have just graduated from university, and I work at a doctor's office. And I said, "Oh, I'm just a receptionist." And Audrey said, "Well, there's no just." She said, "You can be a receptionist when you're 80 as long as it's what you want to do." So I think that that's really the message that any of the young women in this room should really take forward. And I'm really glad that she sort of imparted that on me, because now going back to work, I'm going to feel a little bit better. And I'm not just a receptionist. As I think it was Elisabeth said, you're probably the most important person in that office.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And I think that is really important. You know, many of us who have had the privilege of going to post-secondary education, and you know, there's often somebody is just a cleaner, just a this. Let's not kid ourselves. If those people weren't there doing that critically important work, we couldn't do the work that we do. And I think they need to be valued, and they're all undervalued, in my opinion. But that's just my humble opinion. I want to give one more big round of applause for our 5 sisters.